This discussion. So very much of a discussion, a roundtable discussion on Occupy Wall Street, on the movement Occupy Wall Street. It's brought to you by a number of organizations here at Barton College, including the Hannah Arendt Center. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the director of the Hannah Arendt Center. It's also sponsored by the Center for Civic Engagement here at Barton College and the Student Union. Dan Ginger wanted to say a couple words about the Student Union and help support this.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan.
So I want to thank Dan for really being very helpful in organizing the event, as well as Aaron Kagan over at the Center for Civic Engagement. We're going to try and speak for very little time up here, and that way leave time for us to hear your voices and answer questions and have a discussion to the extent possible. So I'm just going to let people speak, actually, probably in the order that they're up here, although I'll go last or wait to see if there's anything to be said at the end. So let me just introduce the people. We have our Paul Marienthal, who I'm sure many of you know. He's the director of the Trustee Leader Scholar Program here at Bard, an amazing program that allows students, undergraduates, to really take leadership roles in trying to make the world a better place. Matt Constantino, who's a student here at Bard and has been involved in the Occupy Wall Street protest movement. Jennifer Derr, Professor Jennifer Derr from the History Department, who teaches Middle Eastern history, Middle Eastern studies, history and politics. Alitza Ray, who's another student here at Bard, again involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. And then Stephen Maslow, who works on Wall Street and is also the chairman of the board of the Hannah Arendt Center here at Bard, who graciously took some time out of his day to come down and participate in the discussion with us. As I said, I'm Roger Berkowitz. I'm the director of the Hannah Arendt Center. Hannah Arendt, as many of you know, wrote quite a bit on revolution and on the importance of popular democracy. And we at the center have been very interested in and involved in thinking about the movement for the last 2 weeks. We've posted a number of articles about it on our blog, and many more are coming in the next couple of days. And if any of you would like to contribute either in comments or in writing an essay, we'd love to hear from you. So I'm asking everyone to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes, very short, tell you a little bit about what they're doing, and we'll go on. So without further ado, Paul Marienthal.
Hi. I'm going to speak for just a moment on history. I think I'm the oldest one here, and my lifetime spans the Civil Rights Movement. I was born in 1949. So my life has gone through what is essentially the Civil Rights Movement, women's movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. I was asked to speak about protests and the idea of protest. I'm not going to take up this particular topic, but I'm interested in the question of protest because I've seen many that work and some that don't work. And what I would say to you, study. Be aware that good information really matters. If you're going to take a stand about this and you're going to convince people, which is ultimately what you need to do, what the world currently needs, and it needed 60 years ago when I was born, was a different story. A different story about race, a different story about homophobia, a different story about what constituted a person and people. That's storytelling. A lot of protest is telling a different story, right? What you're doing is telling the story that gets out into the world. A story about who has intelligence, who has a right, who has power, who doesn't have power. It's important that the information be correct. Please get your information right. Study. Do what you're doing in your classes and get the information right. Look at the history of economics. If you simply speak from your gut, know that there will be consequences. The anti-Vietnam movement was incredibly important in stopping that war. I also lived through Kent State. Just so that you know, I don't know how many of you know about Kent State. After 4 or 5 years of very, very effective anti-war activity broadly in this country, one afternoon, the National Guard gunned down students your age. Just gunned them down. And the student movement stopped dead in its tracks. There wasn't one of us who didn't stand utterly shocked and saddened. It was a crushing blow, and in many ways, it's an incomprehensible thing when you think about it. When you think of how much energy right now is being discussed about the assassination that the government allowed, that was against youth unarmed standing on a lawn. So don't be naive that there will be pushback and backlash. There absolutely will. So please get your information right.
Good evening. I was invited to take part in this discussion to present what was phrased to me as a student perspective on the Occupy Wall Street movement. And it's important for me to start my part out tonight by saying that there are many students at Bar involved in Occupy Wall Street. Many of you, I can see you right now. And I am not their leader or their delegate or their spokesperson. However much I may have worked with these students over the past few weeks, however much I may be in agreement with them very often. But to hear from a greater number of us, I'd like to encourage you to please come tomorrow to a teach-in that students organizing Bar Occupy Wall Street are holding. It's 5 p.m. in Klein faculty room, and there will be some open discussions, some research lectures, and it's really the best way to get to know the student perspective. So I hope you'll come and see many of you there. So I only have a few minutes for opening remarks, and I've already said however much of it as I have, apologizing for giving opening remarks. But to the point then, I wanted to introduce my student perspective tonight by talking a bit about participatory democracy. While the diversity of tactics and beliefs of those participating in Occupy Wall Street has been pointed out, been harped upon, been exaggerated, been deliberately misinterpreted, then satirized, and all this before the New York Times even noticed that there were some differently dressed bankers loitering in the lower Manhattan Park. The ability of Occupy Wall Street to house such a diversity is based in philosophical ideals the movement shares with participatory democracy groups the world over. Those ideals are based in open working groups and general assemblies, and participants who are entrusted only to represent themselves in decisions made on the principle of rule by consensus and cooperation. These have a long and nuanced history, from town hall meetings of New England to ACT UP and the early gay rights movement, to the Zapatista Army for national liberation in South Mexico. And I haven't time right now to talk about all of these, but essentially at their shared core and history, the Occupy Wall Street movement is an attempt to construct a better device than a corporate state by reallocating concentrations of power to all participants in a democracy, not simply the majority vote victor of a corporately funded, legally manipulated, and altogether unrepresentative election. Occupy Wall Street shares these methodological origins with the losers of neoliberalism and capitalism without bounds. Those who lost their homes in fraudulent mortgage exchanges just as they were paying to bail out those same very brokers. Those who have found themselves subject to police raids and placement on government watch lists for taking part in anti-capitalist advocacy groups. Those who must choose between foregoing college education and a lifetime of debt. Occupy Wall Street shares its origins with all and any who realize that the people's construction of alternate governments and occupations cannot stop because there are no other devices through which one can challenge the power structures that perpetuates the tragedies I've just mentioned. These are, after all, profitable tragedies. And in our corporate state, there is but little hope in the masses attempting to implement even minor legislative recourses to the profit motives of the powerful few. So the masses have constructed an alternate government. It's as part of an American movement of small participatory democracies against looming multinational corporations that we're seeing Occupy Wall Street spreading to occupations of the people's space all over the world, starting at least with the Alter Globalization protests of the late 90s in Seattle. This direct democracy is thus not about producing a list of reforms for our so-called representatives to consider, or producing our own representatives to debate them, because our manner of governance is going to require replacement before such efforts would ever be answered. We are watching as the deteriorating republic turns to police violence and extra-legal imprisonment to represent and protect its people. The whole world is watching. And so a new government begins.
I'm going to try to talk about, can everybody hear me? Okay, that's good. I'm loud. As Roger said, my name is Derr. I teach Middle Eastern history and politics here at Bard, and I believe that I'm on this panel to sort of give an international perspective as to what we're seeing on Wall Street. And I'd also like to spend a few minutes talking about sort of the potential pitfalls of some of the strategies that we've seen based on the experience of 2011 in other parts of the world. And I think I wanted to start with a question today, and I want to pose a few questions that I don't yet have the answers to. And that question is that when we watched Occupy Wall Street begin, we saw this very conscious identification with protests in other parts of the world, but specifically with demonstrators in Tahrir Square in Egypt. And my work is in Egypt. I spend about 4 months of the year in Egypt, and I was actually just there for the summer. So I saw a number of these demonstrations in Tahrir Square. And I think the question that I want to ask is whether what's going on in Wall Street bears a more substantive connection to the revolutions that we've seen throughout 2011 that extends beyond a question of tactics. And when we talk about tactics, if there is a connection between these different oppositional moments, whether things can be learned from tactics in places of the world like Egypt that began their revolutionary cycle a bit earlier. Now, I should say that I begin this with a bit of skepticism after watching a weekend in Egypt that calls the quote-unquote revolution into question. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about tactics, and then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about raising a few questions about the future of the movement. The first thing that I would say is that I do think that in terms of a revolutionary tactic, and as much as we make the revolution our own and its politics our own through our method, I think there's some real connections between what's going on in Wall Street and what has happened in the Arab world. There certainly is a conscious effort on Wall Street, and I should say Wall Streets in the plural, to unify protesters who are of different ages, different classes, different genders, different races, through this sort of sense of one demand. And this demand is more amorphous than it was in the Middle East, because obviously oftentimes in the Middle East, that demand amounted to the overthrow of a dictator. Now, what I will say is that while the unifying demand was a successful strategy, at least in Egypt, what we've seen in the period since Mubarak's overthrow on February 11th was that the unification of that demand is false in a sense. So groups that could come together to overthrow the government have now split apart again, and divisions in society are now re-emerging. So while that unifying demand is strengthening, I also think it has a certain set of weaknesses associated with it. I think that this idea of reclaiming space, as has been done in Wall Street and was also done throughout the Middle East, is a powerful idea. I think there is this sense that in a society which is spatially divided not only in terms of class, but also in terms of where our centers of business and government are, that the idea of a popular protest reclaiming space is a good one, and one that should be emulated. However, that said, what we saw in the Middle East is that the geography of protests tended to be concentrated in capital cities. And the question that I would pose to all of you who are involved with occupying Wall Street is how you plan on taking the geography of protests not only out of urban areas, but also into areas of the state, areas of the nation that don't necessarily identify with the urban space as it has been conceptualized in the protests. On a more cynical note, I'm really trying to only talk 5 minutes. I think that there is a sort of strength to the methodology that the Occupy Wall Street protesters have used. And when I say that, I mean there's a strength to this idea of consensus. There is a strength to the idea of not having a clearly identifiable leadership. But if we look at what's going on in the Middle East, I also think there are real questions of strategy that people need to begin to think about. In other words, after sort of, in Egypt specifically, after the overthrow of a leader, how is a revolution to continue? So in Egypt right now, there's a question as to whether a revolution at all has happened, despite Mubarak's overthrow, given the continued existence of a particular kind of elite and a particular kind of military rule. So I would ask those same things to people who are protesting on Wall Street in terms of the strength of a protest tends to be a weakness of the aftermath. And I think it's important to think about how a transition will be made at different points in a protest. I will also say that I think that there is something significant in all of these revolutionary moments, but there are real questions to be asked about whether they belong to the same revolutionary moment. And this is a question I ask myself often. So, there are commonalities in the sense that what people are protesting, the corruption that people protest against on Wall Street, and the formulation of politics that has emerged, that is something that's common. That is something that has been protested against in Europe and in regions of the Middle East. But on top of that, I'm thinking about 2011 as a year of opposition. I think we need to think about if we are all connected, and if there is a global movement, what exactly that means and what exactly that is, beyond a question of tactics and beyond a question of strategy.
My name is Eliza. I'm a student, and I was down on Wall Street the first day and night, and over the weekend I got to go down to Boston and see the occupation downtown there. And I believe that our political process has become so dominated by corporate interest and lobbyists that our vote may not really matter anymore. And this is a really important issue to me because I care about environmental issues, and I think it's a really important issue for more than just environmental issues as well. A lot of the issues that I had mentioned when I was on Wall Street included campaign finance reform, the millionaire's tax, corporate tax holidays, corporate personhood, grievances against the Federal Reserve Bank, and government bailouts, put stronger limitations on the federal government, and end the wars. And all of these really relate directly to the statement that politicians are controlled by the corporate interest. Now, a good example of this is the Keystone XL pipeline, which is being built by TransCanada that will go from the Canadian tar sands to the Gulf of Mexico. And the lobbyist for TransCanada, Paul Elliott, happens to be Hillary Clinton's former campaign staffer, and Hillary Clinton and the State Department determine whether or not this pipeline will be built. Another example is the Koch brothers, who have violated many laws. They've sold millions of dollars of petrochemical equipment to Iran, circumvented sanctions against Iran, and thwarted the U.S. trade ban. And the Koch brothers are able to do this because they know that even if they are fined, they will still be able to turn a profit. So these issues are really very closely connected, and for reasons like this and people's anger with things like this are why people began occupying Wall Street. Now, once the unions began endorsing the occupation, the protesters gained a huge amount of legitimacy. But the major criticism is still, why are they down there? What are they fighting? Why are they angry? And people don't seem to realize that there is a set of demands and there are legitimate reasons why people are upset. I went out and on the internet to look for a list of reasons, and on the Occupy Wall Street website, there is minutes typed up of the General Assemblies held every night, and there is a document that is currently 147 pages that includes a list of 8 reasons that are written really concisely, and it's open for everyone on the internet to comment on, so it's basically like an ongoing list of demands. I have that here if anyone wants to see it too. So I believe that if the movement were to come out with a single demand, and that demand could not encompass all the other demands, they would lose a huge amount of people who felt they could no longer relate. And I think this prospect would be really detrimental to the protest. So rather, many organizations and unions have been able to find a way that their individual campaigns can relate to the overall message. And that's why so many people have been able to feel they could connect. Now, I believe that you can't fight corporate greed, and you can't put an end to corporate greed, which is something that a lot of people downtown are saying, not even downtown, but all over the country in these protests. But we can establish laws and reform existing practices that will hold our governments and our politicians accountable. And for these reasons, I think that the occupation is extremely necessary because it is bringing people together, like in this room, to talk about these issues. And pretty soon, our politicians and governments will be forced to address what's going on. And
my name is Steve Maslow, and as Roger said, I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the Hannah Arendt Center here at Bard. My Wall Street credentials are that I am, when Derr started alive, I was the managing director in charge of the equity capital markets group there for 16 years. I'm currently a private equity investor on Wall Street, and when I was your age, I was a student of Hannah Arendt's last research assistant and the author of her biography, Elizabeth Young Rule at Wesleyan. And for that reason, I know many anecdotes about Hannah Arendt, including her propensity to nurture and feed her students, which is why I passed out the brownies. By the way, it's not Hannah Arendt's recipe, it's from that other towering intellectual 20th century, Nigel Lawson. They've been very useful to me, these brownies, in my victory over my struggle with contemporary issues like anorexia and other ones, like coping with hunger, which I think is one of the issues we're here to discuss. I am sad to say that on Sunday, on television, a new Muppet joined Sesame Street. Lily, the pink-faced Muppet, whose family faces food insecurity. And that was the subject of an hour-long episode. And I think the fact that such a thing is reaching out to the popular culture is an indication of what America has come to. I was down at Zuccotti Park. I'm using it as a metaphor for I wasn't actually at the park because I couldn't get there. I was downtown. I think that what they are staging there and what I like to feel part of is nothing less than a true Arendtian-style revolution. I think the people on in the protests, at least the ones I talked to, and there were many, refuse to accept that capitalism has defeated democracy. And I would like to agree with them. I think that their spontaneity, the fact that they feature plural participation of many people in what Hannah Arendt used to call action concert, and that they're acting out human law as opposed to historical law is indicative of the genuineness and the authenticity and spontaneity of what's going on here. I think that many people have also become upset, at least in the media they have, about the seeming disorganization of these protests. That there is no one message, or there are too many messages. So the only one that seems that the New York Times, anyway, and the Wall Street Journal will pick up on is the 99% versus 1% message. That it's very messy, that the people in the protests lack media savvy, they're not on point, they don't have telegenic leaders, they don't have leaders at all. And the other trappings of our culture. Our culture has become a hotbed of social rest. And these people are doing something about it. I think all of these things taken collectively, standing a little bit outside it, although each from Wall Street, it's hard for me to stand completely outside it, is that the people in the streets, and I think yourselves and myself too, I think we know something we know what we don't know. We know that something is very rotten in the state of Denmark, and the core of that rottenness is Wall Street. And that is because Wall Street is basically the engine of income inequality in America. And income inequality is essentially what we're talking about. The rich are too rich, and the poor are too poor. The reason the characters on Sesame Street is that, depending on whose statistics you believe, 1 in 5 families in America now faces hunger. This is the richest nation that there ever was, whose very foundation was the notion that abundance and not scarcity might be the rule of the day, and 1 in 5 families now in America faces hunger. This did not happen by accident. The transformation represents and is the residue of the repeated and aggressive application of political power. I think, and that power was emanating from Wall Street and its money, some of that power has been directed at removing existing regulations which have been designed to protect, or they were designed against speculative excess and conflicts of interest, which is why, as was just pointed out here, a former Clinton staff director is now going to influence the decision about whether or not we build a pipeline across the length and breadth of the land and destroy everything in its path. The net effect of Wall Street's concentrated power application is not what they claim. It is not. We do not have an idealized free market in which to play. That is not the case at all. What we have now is a tilted field which favors those who have power, who have connections, who lack scruples, and who can play in a very profitable but systematically risky game. I challenge anyone in this audience to name me an industry anywhere in the world, much less the United States, that is better at privatizing assets and socializing risks than Wall Street. In fact, that has become the name of the game. Okay? We have, in our time, the central problem here, and I think at the core of the protest, and to pick up on something that Paul said, it is very important to know your statistics if you're going to fight this fight. We have a hyper-concentration of income. The protesters that I met carry on about 99% versus 1%. I can say to you that the protesters understate. It's actually 0.01% of the population that controls the assets, but I'll come to that. The share of income which has been earned, and I'm indebted to Piketty and Saez for these statistics, the share of income which is earned by the top 1% of our population increased from 9% in 1974 to more than 23.5% in 2007. Think about that. The last time such a disparity existed was in 1928 on the eve of the Great Depression. But as I said, I think the protesters understate. It is the richest 0.1%, 1 in 1,000 households, okay, 0.01, 1 basis point, okay, 300,000 people in the United States who collectively capture more than $1 trillion a year in annual compensation. That works out to about $7.1 million a piece. Think about that. 300,000 people earn collectively about $7.1 million a piece. And if you read Warren Buffett's letter to the Journal and the Times, you realize that these people pay a net effective tax rate of about 17% a year. Okay? So figure that out. If 300,000 people earn $7.1 million and pay an average effective tax rate of 17%, they're paying $361 billion a year in taxes. If they paid a normal tax rate, the normal federal, okay, at the lowest rungs about 38%, and mind you, if you're a resident of New York City, you pay more, but okay, let's do 38%. If they paid 38% like everyone else in America, they would collectively be paying $810 billion a year in taxes. The deficit, the difference between what they should be paying and what they are paying is just under $450 billion. $450 billion would solve a lot of problems this year in America. Don't you agree? And we might start with hunger. But anyway, that's a different thing. So, why am I saying this? I'm saying that's just one statistic. I could give you many more. I'm holding myself back to keep myself short. I do think it is important to arm yourself, to be aware of these things, to be sympathetic with the protesters, even if they're not so articulate. It's okay. They know something's rotten. They're feeling it. Okay? There's a very famous line in Inferno. I wailed not, so inside I grew to stone, and others cried. I don't think we want to be amongst those people. I would urge you to join the protesters in any way you can. You can go down there. I realize it's far, and you have studying is probably a higher priority for you, and I agree with that. But there are things we can do in our everyday lives. I wrote about this on the blog the other day, especially young people regarding the internet. If you're not paying for what you're using, you are the product. Okay? If you're not paying for it, you're the product. Be very mindful of that. Go on Google, go on the privacy settings, and don't let the advertising companies have your data. Become a collective pain in the ass. Do not obey corporate America. Okay? I know Roger disagrees with me. I would urge you not to pick up after yourselves at McDonald's, Burger King, and other fast food restaurants. These corporate shareholders are not paying their workers. They don't pay them benefits. That people are slaving away there at $7.50 an hour. It would be okay if the shareholders of McDonald's had to hire a few more workers to pick up. You don't have to do it. You don't have to subsidize the shareholders of McDonald's or Burger King or anything else. And when you're at Home Depot and places like this, please don't use automated checkouts. Okay? Please wait in line. Put up with the surly service. These people are also standing on their feet for minimum wages without benefits. Put up with it. It's okay. Okay? Don't give in to corporate America. Don't let them make you into a atomized, automated thing that they can count on to behave in a predictable way. And very importantly, also, any representative, any elected representative of yours, please drop them a note and put in whatever language suits you that you are unhappy about income inequality in America. This is the issue of our time, and that is what these protests are about. Thank you.